What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another Transformers Studio Series video. In today's video I'm going to be ranking all 141 Studio Series figures into a tier list and then giving you my thoughts on each one as we go. Now, I won't be including the Gamer Edition or the 86 line in this video, mainly due to the fact that this is already a massive list of characters, and so I feel like they deserve their own video rather than trying to squeeze them into this one. But as for how I'm actually going to be ranking these guys, I'm basically going to be focusing on three main characteristics that I personally look for in a figure and then judging them based on how well they can pull off each one. These characteristics are: 1. How accurate the figure is to its on-screen counterpart, with any concept art figures being instead based on the design of the figure itself. 2. How much posability and playability each figure has in respect to the size and the bulk of the character that they're based on. And finally, number 3, how enjoyable of a transformation does the figure have, with my personal preference being a nice level of complexity that isn't too awkward and it also doesn't take too long to complete. These are just what I personally tend to prioritise when it comes to forming an opinion on a figure. However, in certain cases I may also take into account the quality of the paint job and the plastic if I deem it particularly noticeable. Other than that though, I just want to make it clear that this is all my own opinions that are purely based on my personal experiences and preferences with these figures, and so if you want to discuss any of my rankings in the comments below, then please keep that in mind and be respectful, as I'd love to hear how your list would differ from mine and then have a discussion about it with you. So here we are, guys, we have our tier list in front of us, and as you can see we have a grand total of 9 separate tiers to rank all of these characters into. And yes, I know that is a lot, however when you have 141 figures to rank, I think it only makes sense to be a little bit more specific with how I feel about each one. Now, since there are so many characters that I have to get through in this video, I am going to be trying to keep as brief as possible when it comes to explaining why they're going where they're going, and so I'll probably just give you one big reason for it and then move on to the next character. However, other than that, we can finally start putting some characters into this tier list, and of course our first one here is Studio Series number 1, Deluxe Class Bumblebee. Now straight away, I'm going to put Bumblebee in underwhelming, and this is because I just find him to be way too brittle and he's not really that accurate to the film. As for Stinger, I'm going to put him in average, since I do really like playing around with him, but I do also think he has quite a messy robot mode. Then we have Crowbar, and he's going to go in good. I do really love his robot mode, but I just hate that his dreads stick out the back of the vehicle mode and they get in the way of the transformation. Now on to Ratchet, and he's also going to go in good, but he doesn't go any higher since I really hate that his roof rack hangs so awkwardly on his back. Our first Voyager class figure next, with Revenge of the Fallen Optimus, and I'm gonna have to put him in underwhelming simply because I don't really like how his chest and back look in robot mode. Now for Voyager class Starscream, and I'm going to put him in decent since he does look great in both modes. However, I just hate that he's an upscaled version of his Dark of the Moon Deluxe. Next up is the incredible Leader class Grimlock, and without a doubt he is going to be our first figure to go in the perfect tier. Blackout, on the other hand, is going to have to drop down to amazing, mainly because I do find his transformation to be a little bit finicky and his hands look a bit weird. However, everything else about this figure is perfect to me. So next up is technically our first concept art figure of the line, as Thundercracker never appeared in Dark of the Moon. And so if I just go off the design of the figure alone, I am going to put it in amazing. I love this mould and I love how he looks in both modes. But back to the 2007 movie now with Deluxe Class Jazz. And unfortunately I'm going to have to put him in decent, mainly because I find him to be way too rectangular and his feet are way too flat. Lockdown is next, and despite being the first Studio Series figure that I ever bought, I am going to have to put him in underwhelming just because he lacks a decent amount of articulation and he is slightly too small to scale with the rest of the line. Back to the Voyager class now with Brawl from the 2007 movie, and I actually really like his robot mode. However, his tank mode does fall short, and so I'm just going to have to put him in good. Now on to Revenge of the Fallen Megatron, and I'm going to put him in amazing, simply due to his accuracy and his playability. However, he does have quite a large void between his chest and his back, so he just misses out on going into perfect. Ironhide, on the other hand, is definitely perfect, and he is one of my all-time favourite figures from the entire line. Next up is our first Bumblebee movie figure, and unfortunately this guy is going to have to go in the bad tier, mainly due to how inaccurate he is compared to his on-screen counterpart. So back to some repaints now, and our first one here is Dark of the Moon Ratchet. And I actually prefer this guy over the original Ratchet, and so I'm just going to stick him right in front of him in the good tier. I can't say the same for the next one though, as Shadow Raider here has a very ugly paint scheme in my opinion, and so I am going to have to put him in the bad tier. Then it's Bumblebee again, and this guy's going straight into the pointless tier, and the same goes for the next two Bumblebee repaints as well. As for Revenge of the Fallen Starscream, it's basically the same as Ratchet, where I prefer this look over the original look, and so he's going to go in decent and sit right in front of the original figure. Next is Dropkick in his helicopter mode, and this figure is absolute trash, and he is one of my absolute least favourite figures from the entire line. KSI Sentry is next, and he is basically just a blue repaint of Stinger. However, I actually prefer Stinger over this guy, and so I'm going to have to put him in underwhelming. Then it's Bumblebee again from the Bumblebee movie, and I honestly cannot tell the difference between this and the original figure, and so I'm just going to have to put him in pointless. As for our next Bumblebee, we have his The Last Night version, and he's going to go in underwhelming since he's just a re-release of his original deluxe from The Last Night. And joining him in underwhelming is World War II Bumblebee, mainly because of his outrageous backpack. And our final Bumblebee for now is the Clunker Bumblebee, and this guy is going to go just in front of the original just because it's a way more accurate paint job. But now we are finally on to some new molds, with our next figure being Deluxe Class Barricade. This guy is fun to mess around with, however he does lack accuracy in his lower arms as his hands should be coming from his wheels. And so with that in mind, I'm gonna have to put him in decent. Next up is Deluxe Class Sideswipe from Dark of the Moon, and this guy is going straight into perfect. He's my favourite character from the films, and they perfectly translated him into figure form. Now, our next figure is an absolute embarrassment from Hasbro, and that is Deluxe Class Crankcase. They literally had the Berserker mould ready, but yet they chose to repaint the crankcase mould instead, and so this figure is just complete trash and it should never have been made. But anyways, our next figure is Battle Damage Megatron, and I actually like this guy slightly more than the original, and so he is going to go just in front of him in the amazing tier. Now onto what is technically the first remake of the line, and that is Optimus Prime from the 2007 movie. And this is a much needed upgrade over that original Voyager. I do still think that the chest isn't quite right, however it's still an upgrade, and so he's going to go in amazing. As for Bone Crusher, I also think he's an amazing figure, with his only flaw being a slight lack of posability options, however everything else is pretty much perfect. This next one though might be a bit controversial, as I do actually really like Dark of the Moon Megatron, and if it wasn't for his really hollow vehicle mode and his blocky legs, I would actually be putting him in amazing. But since these problems do exist, he's going to have to get dropped into good. Jetfire though is definitely going to go in perfect, as he looks absolutely incredible in both his robot and his vehicle mode. Unfortunately, I can't say that I feel the same about Deluxe Class Drift from The Last Night, as this is yet another straight up re-release, and I was never a massive fan of the original mold to begin with, and so I'm gonna have to put him in the bad tier. But now we have our first Constructicon up next with Voyager Class Rampage, and this guy definitely looks amazing. The only real problem I have with him is the lack of articulation in his arms, and so he's gonna go in the good tier. Back to the Bumblebee movie now with Voyager Class Optimus Prime, and I think we can all agree that this guy is absolutely perfect. Next up is yet another re-release from The Last Night with this being Deluxe Class Cogman. Like Drift, I was never a fan of this mold originally, and so I'm gonna put him in the bad tier as well. And to give them both company in the bad tier, we have Deluxe Class Shatter in her car mode. This figure looks good, but if you even lay a finger on it, it pretty much just crumbles to pieces. Now for our next Constructicon, we have Scrap Metal, and this guy's going to go in average. I literally have no opinion on him whatsoever, as I just find him to be an extremely basic figure. Long Haul though is an amazing looking figure, and his bulk is perfectly translated from the film into toy form. I don't take issue with his articulation since he is a very bulky character, and so I'm going to put him in amazing. Then we have KSI Boss, and this is exactly the same mold as Thundercracker, with which I've already expressed my love for it. I do prefer Thundercracker over this guy though, and so I'm just going to stick him right behind him in amazing. So Leader Class Optimus Prime is up next, and he's basically the same mold as the 2007 version, just with a whole bunch of accessories added on. And as much as I do love the wingsuit and the trailer, it's still the same base mold, and so he's got to go in amazing just in front of the original version. Now as for Age of Extinction Drift, he is definitely going to go in perfect. He is one of my favourite figures, and he is definitely the definitive version of Drift in figure form. And joining Drift in perfect is Deluxe Class Dropkick in his car mode. This is such a satisfying figure to pose around and transform, and it's such a massive improvement over his original Deluxe. Now unfortunately this next figure doesn't quite continue the run of amazing figures that we've just had, as Deluxe Class Hightower is really nothing to write home about, and so he's just going to have to go in average. So we've got a bit of a weird one next, as it's the As Seen in Parks Megatron, and he's basically just a grey repaint of his Dark of the Moon leader, but without the cape. I'm not really sure why they did this, and so I think he's going to have to go in pointless. And now we have yet another Bumblebee next, with this one being his Camaro mode from the 2007 movie. This is a fun figure, and I do think he looks great in both modes, and so I'm going to put him in good. Next up is his brother-in-arms, that being Hot Rod in his World War II version. This is basically just a slight repaint of the Bumblebee mold, just with Hot Rod's head slapped on top, which does therefore make him highly inaccurate to how he looked in the film, and so I'm gonna put him in bad. We've got Soundwave up next, and this is his Dark of the Moon version, which I think looks incredible. The only downside is his chest, which is slightly inaccurate. However, other than that, I think he's amazing, and so he's gonna go in the amazing tier. Now for the next figure here, we actually have three to talk about, as this is the Chromia, RC and Elita 1 multi-pack, which does come in a deluxe class box. Now due to them having to be in scale, they do unfortunately lack in detail and sturdiness. However, at the same time, I don't really mind that as much considering how small these guys are, and so I'm going to put them in decent. Mixmaster, I am going to put in good. I like how he looks in vehicle mode and robot mode, however I do think his head mode is slightly inaccurate and his transformation is a little bit finicky as well. Next up is 2007 Megatron, and I am actually going to put this guy in amazing. I love the way they managed his kibble, as I just think he looks amazing from all angles. The only real problem I do have with this figure is the fact that his legs are a little bit chunky. However, at the same time, they did have to put all the kibble somewhere. Now for Leader Class Scavenger, I'm going to put him in decent. Obviously, he's way out of scale for one. However, I also find that he's just a really awkward figure to try and pose around in any decent way. But moving on now to Leader Class Shockwave, and of course, he's going straight into the perfect tier. This guy is about as accurate of a figure as you can possibly get, and I just think he looks absolutely incredible. This also applies for our next figure, as Off-Road Bumblebee also looks incredible. I genuinely cannot find any faults with this guy, which therefore means that he's going to have to go in perfect as well. As for Roadbuster, I'm going to stick him in amazing. I love his vehicle mode, with it finally being the weaponized version, and I also think his robot mode is pretty solid too. Then for Deluxe Class Jet Mode Shatter, I am going to drop her into decent. I do like her vehicle mode, and I do think her robot mode looks great from the front. However, if you turn her to the side, you're just immediately struck by the insane amount of kibble she has, which does limit the amount of posability that you can get out of her. But speaking of limited posability, next up is Voyager class Scrapper. This guy does look really good, and his transformation is fairly enjoyable. However, other than that, there's not really much that you can do with him, and so I'm gonna have to put him in good. Now onto Voyager class Sentinel Prime, and straight away I've got to say that this guy is amazing. I do wish that his sword was a bit bigger and that he came with his shield, and I also think that his transformation is a little bit awkward. However, other than that, everything about this figure is perfect, and so I'm going to put him into amazing. So it's been quite a while since we last put a figure into the trash tier. However, luckily this next one definitely deserves its placement in there, and that is Deluxe Class Soundwave from Revenge of the Fallen. If you compare this figure to his original Deluxe from 2009, you will fully be able to understand exactly why I'm putting him this low on the tier list, as this figure is an absolute embarrassment compared to that original figure. But anyways, we have another wrecker up next with Deluxe Class Top Spin. And like Roadbuster, this guy has an amazing vehicle and robot mode. However, unlike Roadbuster, I do find him to be a bit less enjoyable to pose and mess around with, and so I'm going to have to put him in good instead. Now on to Cliff Jumper from the Bumblebee movie, and I'm going to put this guy in decent since I like his colour scheme and his head sculpt. However, I really don't like his unreasonably large backpack. Next, we have Voyager class Blitzwing, and I absolutely love just how accurate and fun this guy is, and so I'm gonna put him in perfect. Now on to our penultimate Constructicon with Leader class Overload, and if I was going by design alone, this guy would be straight into perfect. However, because of his lack of posability and articulation, I'm gonna have to drop him into amazing instead. As for our final Constructicon, we have Skipjack, who is basically just a yellow repaint of Rampage, and because I like that mold so much, I'm gonna put this guy right behind Rampage in the good tier. And with that, we also have our final wrecker up next, and so Leadfoot here is going to go in the good tier. However, I'm going to put him in front of Topspin since I love the addition of Steeljaw, and I just generally prefer Leadfoot's design over Topspin's anyway. But we have now reached Studio Series number 69, and quite fittingly so, this is Commander Class Devastator. And before I place him into this tier list, I just want to say that this is an absolute masterpiece of engineering, and the fact that each segment can both turn into a robot and a vehicle is absolutely insane in and of itself. But despite all of that, I do still have to acknowledge the fact that this figure isn't that accurate to the film, and it is a bit of a nightmare to transform and combine each individual robot into this mode. And so with that in mind, he is gonna have to go at the bottom of amazing. Next up is B127 from the Bumblebee movie, and this guy's just a yellow repaint of Cliff Jumper, but with Bumblebee's head added on instead. I do prefer the red colour scheme over the yellow one though, and so I'm just gonna put him right behind Cliff Jumper. But with that, we have now just passed the halfway point in this ranking. And if you've made it this far, then I just want to say a massive thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this video, as it really does mean a lot to me. And if you want to support me further, then please feel free to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, as I have tons of Transformers videos coming up in the future. But anyways, back to the ranking now, and our next figure here is number 71, Deluxe Class Dino. This figure looks great. I really like how little kibble there is in his robot mode, and I love the various sculpted details on his body. I do wish that he could have turned into a Ferrari like he does in the film, but I still think his vehicle mode looks pretty decent as it is, and so I'm gonna put this guy near the top of good. Next up is Voyager Class Starscream from the Bumblebee movie, and I'm gonna put this guy in amazing. I absolutely love this mold, and I think he looks pretty much bang on to how he looked in the film. And we have another great mold next with Leader Class Grindor. This guy perfectly improves upon the original figure, with him having much better hands and a slightly better paint job. I do still find his transformation to be a bit frustrating though, and so he's still going to go in amazing, but he's going to go right in front of Blackout. But now it's time for another Bumblebee, with this time being his Revenge of the Fallen look. And this is basically the same mold as the 2007 one, however I do actually prefer this colour scheme, and so I'm going to put him just in front of the original mould. And sticking with Revenge of the Fallen, our next figure is Deluxe Class Jolt. This figure has a great colour scheme and he looks great in both modes. He does suffer in his articulation though, and so he's going to have to get dropped into good. Next up is another Bumblebee movie seeker with Thrust. And this guy's going to go right behind Starscream just because I kind of prefer the red and blue colour scheme over this one. Now our next figure is an interesting one, as we have here the Nest version of the Off-Road Bumblebee. I'm not too sure as to why Hasbro decided to give us these repaints, and despite actually kind of liking this colour, I am going to have to put him in pointless just because I don't think we really needed these repaints. Now on to Sideswipe again, this time being his Revenge of the Fallen version, and like his Dark of the Moon figure, this guy is going straight into perfect. So, Bumblebee is back again in the form of his high octane design from Age of Extinction. Unfortunately though, this is yet another re-release of an old figure, which therefore means that it lacks in detail, accuracy, and it's way out of scale with the rest of the line. And so with that in mind, he's gonna have to go in underwhelming. So we have a bunch of the Cybertron figures up next from the Bumblebee movie, and I'm going to speed through these guys as my opinion on all of them is pretty much the same, which is that they both look good and they're a ton of fun to play around with. And so we have Brawn going in good, Wheeljack going in perfect, Ratchet going in amazing, Soundwave going in perfect, Ironhide going in amazing, and finally RC going in perfect. Now onto the final Bumblebee from the Bayverse, with this being his Dark of the Moon design. And this is actually my favourite version of this mould, and so I'm going to stick him right in front of the Revenge of the Fallen version in the good tier. And speaking of Revenge of the Fallen, next up is Deluxe Class Sideways. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to put this guy in underwhelming. My main problem with this figure is just how unstable and thin his legs are, as it just makes it extremely difficult to pose him or even just to get him to stand straight. As for our next figure, we have another Seeker, this time being Thundercracker, and this is definitely my favourite of the Seeker colour schemes, and so I'm going to stick him just above Starscream and Thrust in the amazing tier. But on to Studio Series number 90 now, with Voyager class Galvatron from Age of Extinction. And I actually really do like this figure, and I do think they did the best they could considering the design of the character. And so, with all that in mind, I'm going to stick him in the middle of the good tier. Next up is number 91, Leader Class The Fallen. And this guy looks absolutely incredible. I love how massive he is, and I think they did an excellent job with the amount of detail that they put into this guy. He definitely deserves to go in perfect, and he is definitely a standout figure from the entire line. But on to Deluxe Class Crosshairs now, and I'm going to have to put this guy in underwhelming since I don't find him to be that fun to transform or pose around, and I do think it is quite a bit of a downgrade compared to his original The Last Knight Deluxe. Hot Rod on the other hand is definitely an upgrade over his original Deluxe, as this figure is insanely accurate, has a great range of articulation, and he has such a fun yet complex transformation that almost resembles the likes of the Masterpiece line. This figure is absolutely perfect, and he always blows me away whenever I pick him up. So our next figure as far as the numbering system goes is number 94 Deluxe Class Hatchet. However, as we all know, he wasn't actually released as number 94 and was instead released as number 117 alongside Ape-Link and Deluxe Class Bumblebee. I am still going to count him here though, as otherwise we wouldn't have a number 94 and that would really bug me. But anyways, despite the somewhat interesting backstory to this figure, he's actually quite uninteresting, and I like just as much as I don't like about this guy, and so I'm going to have to put him in average. Now we have the two remaining Nest figures, and like Bumblebee, I'm going to have to put them both in pointless. So we have our first Rise of the Beast figures coming in now, and our first one here is Deluxe Class Airraiser. This guy looks pretty cool, but overall I think it's just decent. Then we have Cheetor, and this guy looks really good in both modes, and so I'm going to put him in amazing. The only thing that holds him back from going into perfect is the lack of articulation in his beast mode. Next, we've got another amazing figure with Voyager class Battle Trap. The only negative thing that I have to say about this guy is that he's slightly inaccurate to the film. However, that is because he's mostly based on his concept art, and so with that in mind, I'm still going to have to put him in amazing. And now we are on to number 100 of the Studio Series line, and of course, it's another Bumblebee. The difference this time though is that this guy both looks amazing and has a massively improved quality of plastic over his original figures. Into the hundreds now, with 101 being Leader Class Scourge. And straight away, I'm gonna have to knock this guy on his accuracy. This figure is another one to be based on his concept art. However, this design is so far from what we got in the film that I can't really look past it this time, and so I'm gonna have to put him in decent. Luckily, I can't say the same for Voyager class Optimus Prime here though, as this guy looks pretty much perfect in his robot mode. Now, I only say robot mode here as his vehicle mode and the way it cleans up really lets this figure down as a whole, and so he just misses out on going into perfect and instead has to go into amazing. Now for our next Maximal, we have Voyager class Rhinox. And surprisingly, I actually don't find myself taking that much of a liking to this figure, as I just find him to be a bit too awkward to pose around and mess about with, and so I'm gonna actually have to put him in decent. But our final Terracon comes in next with Deluxe Class Nightbird, and I unfortunately find her to be quite underwhelming. I just find her proportions to be a bit too off, and she just has laughably small wings that just end up being an eyesore rather than a really cool looking feature. And my feelings for Deluxe Class Mirage are quite similar, as I also find his proportions to be a bit off, and as well I really don't like how much his kibble hinders his articulation, as it already harms his accuracy in the first place. Overall, I think this guy has to go in the underwhelming tier. But on to some good figures now, and first up here is Leader Class Optimus Primal. This guy has an excellent robot mode, great articulation, and a really fun transformation, and so I'm gonna put him in the amazing tier. My only real problem with this figure though is the way that his legs look in beast mode, as they don't really look that natural. Now on to Deluxe Class Scorponok, and he's gonna go in good since his Scorpion mode looks incredible, but his robot mode only looks decent in my opinion. Next is Deluxe Class Wheeljack, and as far as looks and articulation goes, he is an amazing figure. The only thing that lets him down though is the fact that he has quite an awkward transformation, and so I am going to drop him from amazing to good. Now we have our first official concept art figure up next with Leader Class Bumblebee movie Megatron. I absolutely love this figure. I think his robot mode is perfect, and I love just how many different poses I can get this guy into. I do think his vehicle modes are a little bit lacking, however due to the numerous amount of fan modes there are, I'm still going to put this guy into perfect. As for Bumblebee movie Shockwave, despite actually looking really good in his robot mode, I am going to drop this guy into good since I do find his lack of articulation to be a bit too distracting, and I don't really find his vehicle mode and his transformation to be that interesting either. So we have concept art Sunstreaker up next, and I find this mold to just be decent. I do think he's a bit too yellow and he does really lack in detail, but at the same time I do like his design in both modes, and he can be quite fun to mess around with. But on to our most recent Transformers film now with Transformers 1, and first up here is Deluxe Class Optimus Prime. Now overall I think this figure is in the bottom half of amazing, as I don't really have any major issues with it, however I also don't find myself being blown away by it either. Next up is our final Bumblebee movie seeker for now, and that is Voyager Class Skywarp. Unfortunately though, this has got to be my least favourite of the bunch, and I just wish they'd gone like Thundercracker and painted this guy fully purple instead of the grey, as I think it makes him look really plain and generic. But we go back to Transformers 1 now with Deluxe Class Megatron, and I definitely prefer the look of this guy over Optimus, however, only by a little bit. Then we jump back to Rise of the Beast for Deluxe Class Double Punch, and I prefer this colour scheme over Scorponok, and so he's just going to go right in front of him. Now on to the Bumblebee movie for our first official remake of the line with Deluxe Class Bumblebee. This figure is definitely going to go in perfect. I love how much more proportionate and accurate he is over the original figure, and I hope they continue to make remakes as good as this one in the future. Next up is Leader Class Ape Link, and this might be another controversial one, as I kinda like this figure a bit more than the original. I just really like how his forearms and his head sculpts look, and I really love how he looks with his blades out. And so with all that in mind, I am going to stick him just in front of Optimus Primal. Now our next figure is one that I actually do not own just yet, and that is B127 from Transformers 1. And so I'm just going to have to go by looks here, and as far as I can see, this guy looks pretty good. As for Sentinel Prime, I do actually own this figure, and my opinion on him is that he's perfect. I love how he can turn into all three forms that he had in the film while still looking exactly how he did in each scene. Dipping below Sentinel and into the amazing tier is Leader Class Age of Extinction Optimus Prime. This is another figure where it's pretty much impossible to perfectly translate it into figure form. However, I think they did a pretty damn good job despite all of that. I really like how you can detach his backpack in order to give him an even more accurate look, and I'm pretty impressed by how well he cleans up in both modes overall. Now on to Deluxe Class Q from Dark of the Moon, and he's going to go in good since he's fairly accurate and he does have a pretty nice looking vehicle mode. So we have just 20 figures left to rank, guys, with 12 of them being core class figures and the remaining 8 being figures that I do not own as of yet, and so I will be ranking them purely based on the design of the figure itself. The first of these 8 figures is Deluxe Class Elita 1 from Transformers 1, and to be quite honest, I think she just looks pretty average in my opinion. As for Widowmaker, I think she looks decent. I love her vehicle mode, and I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with her robot mode either. I just don't find it to be that much of an interesting design overall. Next up is Transformers 1 Starscream, and looking at the picture here, I really don't like how yellow his plastic seems to be, and it looks like he has a very basic range of articulation, and so based on all this, I'm gonna have to put him in underwhelming for now. Arachnid on the other hand does look a lot better, and I do really like how well they've translated her design into figure form, but however she doesn't have an accurate vehicle mode, and it does look like she'll have a similar problem with her articulation, and so I think based on this I'm gonna put her in decent. But now we are on to the 4 very recently revealed figures, and also our last 4 non-core class figures of this ranking, and our first one here is Deluxe Class Transformers 5 Barricade. This is definitely my most highly anticipated figure out of the 4, as I absolutely love both the design and the vehicle mode of this guy, and based on how the figure looks in this image, I think they've done a pretty good job overall, and I can't seem to find any immediate issues with how it looks. And so with that in mind, I'm going to put him in amazing for now. Next, we have Voyager Class Alpha Trion, and this also looks like a very well made and accurate figure. I love how the beast mode looks, and I'm a big fan of the purple paint job, and so I think he's going to go in amazing as well. Now we have Nemesis Prime from The Last Night, and this guy is just a slight repaint of the Age of Extinction mould that comes with a different head sculpt. I do prefer the slightly more detailed colour scheme on this guy though, and so he's going to go in front of the original. And finally, our last non-core class figure of this video is also our very first Studio Series Titan class, with that being Age of Extinction Grimlock. Now, I thought that they couldn't do any better than that leader class version, and I was more than happy with that being our definitive Grimlock. However, upon looking at this guy, I genuinely think that this is the best looking figure that we've ever seen from Studio Series, and alongside that, this has made me extremely optimistic for how the rest of the Dinobots are going to look when we eventually get them. But with that, all that is left now is the 12 remaining core class figures, and I'm going to try get through them fairly quickly. And so first is Bumblebee movie Shockwave, and this figure is pretty good, however he obviously is not in scale, and so I'm putting him in decent. Then we have Ravage, and I think this figure looks great, and so he's going to go in good. Next is Laserbeak in his pink Bumblebee design, and to be quite honest here, I'm actually going to put him in pointless. I don't think it was a necessary figure, and I don't think they pulled it off very well anyways. On to Rise of the Beast RC now, and I think this figure is pretty underwhelming. I think she lacks a lot of detail, and she isn't too accurate to the film in both her modes. As for Frieza, I think this is an amazing figure for what it is, and I like how it can turn into 3 separate modes. Then we have Bumblebee, with this being a yellow repaint of Laserbeak, and again, I don't think this was necessary, however, I'm going to put him in bad instead. Now for Noah Diaz, I'm going to put him in amazing, since I love that you can detach his backpack in order to make him fully accurate to the film. Next is Novocaine, and this is basically the same figure as Frieza, and so he's going to go right next to him. Mohawk, I'm going to put in decent since he's surprisingly accurate considering how small he is. Rumble is going to go in amazing since I think he looks great and I love this design overall. Bumblebee movie Starscream is going to go alongside Shockwave since they're decent figures, but they just don't fit in with the rest of the line. And finally, our last Studio Series figure, and the 141st figure to be placed in this tier list, is Core Class Bumblebee Movie Frenzy. And he is gonna go right next to Rumble in the amazing tier, and in doing so, we have finally wrapped up this massive ranking of all the 141 individual Studio Series figures. And so this right here, guys, is how I'd personally rank each figure next to each other, with the order going from left to right and top to bottom. I want to thank you so much for watching this video to the end. I know it was a long one, but I've wanted to do this for a while now, and this is the best way I could come up with to do it while still being able to give my opinion on each figure. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. However, other than that, I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.